Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and welcome to part 4 of our exploration of Asian horror films released in 2014. So we've basically reached my top 15 films for this particular year. This is not necessarily something that was intentional on my part, of doing like an even top 15, which I think also happened in our 2013 videos. But it's simply how the distribution of the films turned out for this year. You know, it's kind of similar to 2013. So my favorite 15 films from 2014 will be covered in parts 4 and 5 of this 5-part video. We will cover 7 of those films tonight, and then my favorite 8 films in part 5. So I've already covered some films in parts 2 and 3 that are worth watching. Remember, part 1 is where all of the dumpster juice was located. So in parts 2 and 3, I would say that, Hungry Ghost Ritual, The Swimmers, and Yamidoga 10 are examples of films that are worthy of being viewed, as well as any others that sound good to you or interesting. However, 2014 contributed some very solid films that are must-sees if you're interested in Asian horror. A lot of those will be covered in part 5, but there's some in this video that are pretty fun, pretty solid films. And there's a variety of movies in my top 15 from this year as well. So, let's do it. And as always, titles for all the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. Our first film tonight is called A Record of Sweet Murder, 2014, of course. This is a Japanese-South Korean co-production, and it's a horror-thriller hybrid. So the following plot summary is taken from Variety, the website. Firmly positioned within the realm of found-footage thrillers, this pick opens with 27-year-old journalist So Young, played by Kkob-bi Kim, telling her cameraman why they've come to a grimy Seoul neighborhood. So Young has been contacted by Sang-joon, a childhood friend who has escaped from a mental institution and murdered 18 people. Now, Sang-joon has promised to tell So Young everything, on the strict condition that a Japanese cameraman records the interview. So arriving on the 5th floor of a dilapidated apartment block, So Young is met by a manic, knife-wielding Sang-joon, promising not to harm her, but threatening to kill the cameraman if he stops filming. Sang-joon says he's actually killed 25 people and needs 2 more victims to complete a miracle that the voice of God has promised him. So yes, this was a co-production that was directed by our good friend, Koji Shiraishi. Of course, we've covered a bunch of this guy's films. He directed Noroi, Grotesque, the Senritsu, Kaiki file films, etc. A bunch. I'm a fan of this director. And this film was produced mostly in South Korea, at least the production. So yeah, Shiraishi has directed a bunch of good found footage horror films in recent years, or at least found footage horror films that are interesting to watch. And this is another one to add a little feather in his cap. A Record of Sweet Murder is filmed as if it were shot in a single take for most of its runtime. Although I'm pretty sure that that's not the case because, for example, the ending would obviously require an edit to complete. And during the film, there are a few quick camera motions, where the camera moves quickly or gets obscured by an object or something that could have been used to edit the film and do multiple takes and whatnot. So, regardless, so the story feels like it's occurring in real time, which is pretty interesting. The interaction between the characters mostly takes place in a single location, a dilapidated apartment, and it involves a combination of psychotic monologues by this killer and some violent scuffles with his would-be victims. So there are maybe a few questionable decisions made on the part of the protagonist, but for the most part, this movie works. Now, you may need to exercise a little bit of patience with this one, because, there are some spots in the middle section that get a little bit repetitive, but like many of Koji Shiraishi's found footage projects, the finale throws in some really cool stuff, and it becomes the most memorable part of the entire film. Shiraishi is one of those directors who I think does a good job of sticking his endings. You know what I mean? Or at least creating a very interesting and creative ending. So this film is pretty cool and unique, but you might need a little bit of patience with it. So the availability of it, of course I recommend this film, is that it gets a United States physical release on DVD on May 28th. Now, depending on when this video goes up on my channel, it may have just come out or may be coming out soon. So that's good. I'm glad this film is getting a U.S. physical release, because more Shiraishi's films need a U.S. physical release, as we'll see soon in this video. So yes, A Record of Sweet Murder is a pretty interesting flick. Check it out. Now our next film tonight is another Koji Shiraishi film. I told you I like this guy. And it's the 6th installment of a series that we've been covering lately. And that is Senritsu Kaiki File, Kowasugi File 6. Also known as, oh yeah, can I pronounce this? Shijou Saikyou no Gekijoban. 2014, this is a horror film, of course, from Japan. So Shiraishi continues his obsession with both documentary-style horror and Japanese legends in this film about strange phenomena that occur on a mountainside near a hydroelectric dam. So the following plot synopsis was paraphrased from a French review site that I've referenced before on this channel, but I'll put a link in the description box below. Accompanied by his longtime assistant and her favorite cameraman, Kudo travels to an abandoned village that lies between a dark mountain and a gigantic hydraulic dam. So to help him in his venture, which promises to be much riskier than previous ones, he seeks the help of a Buddhist priest and, incidentally, exorcist, a cute idol, which is obligatory for his marketing purposes, and an incredulous scientist. Fasten your seatbelt, because the journey promises to be quite hectic. So yes, this is the 6th installment of the Senritsu Kaiki File film series. I reviewed all of the prior films in this playlist. This installment fits in nicely with its predecessors, I believe. You know, it's shot documentary style, of course. It's only 79 minutes long, and all the films in the series have very manageable runtimes. It involves the same main protagonists. You got Kudo and his assistant. Is that his name, Kudo? Where is it? Yes. So it's Kudo and his assistant again. They've been in every film in the series. And it gets rather outlandish at times, which is a hallmark of some of Shiraishi's documentary-style films. And it infuses a dose of creativity into the mix. These are not your typical run-of-the-mill documentary-style horror films. They're really not. They're definitely on the odd side, but that helps to make them memorable. The one aspect that I always talk about with this series is that the one thing that might annoy potential viewers is the wild use of low-grade CGI at times. It creates a bit of an awkward tone that could put some people off, but those sequences are sufficiently bizarre and creative. File 6 in particular features one of the weirdest facial distortion scenes I've ever seen, among a handful of other surprising moments, especially down the stretch. Some scenes in this film are flat out ridiculous, but other ones are quite cool. So you get that mix here. The ending is a cliffhanger that leads to the final installment in this particular story arc, which we'll cover again in a future year in this playlist. The script seems to tie together the mysterious events from prior installments, and the ultimate explanation seems to be interesting, but I did not understand all of the nuances and details because this film has never been released with English subtitles to my knowledge. But all of these films I think are interesting even without subs. So Senritsu Kaiki File 6 is a solid flick. I enjoyed it. It's available on Region 2 DVD without subtitles. There might be a few streaming sites you could find it on too without subs. So yeah, again, this Senritsu Kaiki File film series, it's, if you go into this expecting like a hardcore, like terrifying found footage film like Noroi, you'll probably be disappointed in most of these films. But even though they do get creepy at times, but I go into these expecting some creativity, some fun, touching on some things you don't see that often in many found footage horror films outside of Japan. So that's kind of what you get here, and I like them. All right, next we move to South Korea for The Wicked. Yes, The Wicked. This is a horror-thriller hybrid. So a young woman named Si-young is the new hire at a company, so her boss and coworkers make things a bit difficult for her, for really no good reason. She finds herself an outcast in her office environment, but what her coworkers do not know is that this girl is a psycho. Of course, her manager eventually suspects that there's something wrong with her, because her behavior at work becomes increasingly more aggressive and manipulative, but at that point, it may be too late to reverse the conflict that is manifested in the office. So the interesting aspect of this movie is that it reveals the unstable mentality of this girl immediately to the viewer near the beginning of the film. Another interesting aspect is how the rivalry develops between her and her boss. Two characters who are not particularly likable. I did not like the boss very early in the film. So I was kind of rooting for this character. But once you realize that she's a psycho, it's kind of hard to root for anyone. But it's pretty interesting in how it develops, because you're not really sure who to root for a little while. The opening scene also has a feel of like a black comedy. This is especially true of the music, which is like oddly upbeat. And the interaction between the lead character and her boss is a bit spunky, and actually a bit charming even at times. And this continues at other points in the film. But I like it because it's generally low-key, which makes the transition to creepiness rather easy. This isn't like wacky comedy or anything. It's a black humor. I like the dialogue in this film. It's kind of, the office politics are very confrontational, but also rather sly and underhanded in how these people insult one another. It's pretty pithy and I don't know, how would you say, smug, I guess you would call it. So the actress Jo-hee Park carried the film, and she plays the psycho in this. She's quite good, because she has like this quiet menace about her, and occasionally employs a sly, very subtle, like sadistic smirk at times as well. I liked her in this. This is more of like a slow burn suspense horror flick, but there's also a few wince-worthy scenes to look out for. Nothing too graphic, but they're pretty uncomfortable to watch and add to the tension of the situation. One scene near the end I think is legitimately disturbing, and it kind of flows from the aspect of you're not really sure who to root for. But yeah, that one made my stomach churn just a little bit. On the negative side, I do think that the middle section is a bit on the slow side, but overall, The Wicked, I think, is a legitimately good film. I like this one. Another nice little surprise. The Wicked, last time I checked, it was available on Amazon streaming in the United States. Alright, our next film tonight is one that was a required viewing. I held off covering 2014 in this playlist until I saw this next film, because I figured it was like a required viewing for me to assess the state of the industry. Not necessarily because it was popular, because it isn't, but because it's the next installment in a long line of very good films. And I'm talking about Torihada Gekijoban 2, also known as Goosebumps the Movie 2, which has nothing to do with the Goosebumps franchise that we're familiar with internationally. This is a Japanese horror anthology. So this anthology is a spin-off of the excellent television series from the late 2000s, or I guess you could call them television anthology films. And it's loosely related to the sequel to the first movie version, Torihada Gekijoban from 2012. So I reviewed the prior film in this playlist, and I told you that the focus here is not on supernatural phenomena. Oh no. On the contrary, the villains in this Torihada franchise are a variety of creepy psychos and stalkers. And let me tell you, there are some seriously messed up people in this movie. And since it's an anthology, we get a collection of short films concerning this topic. So the opening segment is sufficiently creepy. It takes place at the crack of dawn while a woman is sleeping. So yeah, that one creeped me out a little bit. There's a segment involving a white umbrella that is rather surprising. I mean, the actual, I guess, death itself is a bit improbable, but the plan behind it is really demented. And then there's another segment involving a couple who rent a room at a love hotel, but have a run-in with one of the employees who keeps calling their room and harassing them. I like the protagonists in this one especially. I mean, this isn't all great segments. I would say the weakest segment is likely the one involving schoolgirls on a rooftop. It involves manipulation that provokes an emotional response from someone, but it's not particularly disturbing in my eyes. But overall, one mildly distracting element in these types of films, like stalker films, is how none of the protagonists will call the cops. Well, most of them won't. But in many cases in Torihada, the way the stories are structured, the events happen so fast that it probably would not have mattered anyways. You know what I mean? The thing I like about these movies is that in a lot of cases, the protagonist is not even aware that the situation is dangerous until it's almost too late. It's almost too late. So they might have a minute to call the cops, while the person is breaking into their apartment or whatever, but the cops would never show up in time to save them anyways. So it's kind of like, it wouldn't matter. In one case, the protagonist calls the cops twice with this person who's stalking them, but the cops can't protect you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the rest of your life, so there's always going to be situations where you're vulnerable, and that's when these demented stalkers will strike. So I did not have much of a problem with that, although there are a few instances where the character decision making could be questioned, but overall it's not a huge flaw, I don't think, in this particular franchise. I like how a few of the protagonists turn out to be dangerous themselves, which is something that happened in the first Torihada film from 2012. Although this one's not quite as cool in its character turns, but there's some cool stuff here. At least one of the stalkers from the previous installments returns to stalk someone else, which is another pretty interesting development here. So in a nutshell, really, Torihada Gekijoban 2 is another solid installment in this psycho killer franchise, but it does feel slightly less dynamic and interesting than its predecessors. But I don't think there was a Torihada film released after this, so if this is the end of the series, I still think it's a pretty good ending to it. And remember, this Torihada film series I covered in a DVD collection addendum video, because I've been looking for these films on DVD forever, and I just found them, like, last year. The Japanese DVDs with no subs, but I bought them, and I have them in my collection now, which I'm happy about. Now, Mitsuki Tanimura, who appeared in just about every one of the prior installments, does not appear in this one. Just in case you're a fan of her and you want to see her, she does not appear in this installment. So, but what about the availability of this one? Well, this one is available on Region 2 DVD without subtitles, as are most of the films in this series. The original TV anthologies used to be available on Viki.com with subtitles in the United States, but they temporarily blocked it. But you might want to try Viki.com if you're not in the United States, and you might be able to watch all 6 of the original, TV anthologies. So this is one of the more interesting Japanese horror franchises that has gone under the radar due to lack of availability overall. But you can watch these without subs if you can find them. Without subtitles, these are enjoyable because they're all short stories about stalkers. It's not like these stalkers talk to these people that much, right? So yeah, these are some flicks to check out. I like them quite a bit. All right, our next film here, we go to mainland China for our next one. And this is another one that's a little bit different. And it's called Inside the Girls, a Chinese mystery horror thriller, again, 2014. Now, this one is set in the 1930s. 4 young college women must stay in a dorm that is rumored to be haunted because it is allegedly structured above a mass grave. Also, room 414 was allegedly the scene of a pregnant woman's death. But when murders begin littering the campus, they suspect that the real threat may be a human one. So this film begins with some panty shots, almost like a Sion Sono film, and there are a few provocative semi-nude shots along the way, but this is not an erotic flick. It's also not gratuitous. It's actually very classy. So this movie feels a bit different, right from the start, because of its visual style. Very brightly lit, and mostly shot during the day, which is a little different for horror films in general. But the night scenes are also nicely shot. You can clearly see everything that's happening and the surrounding environments. Due to the time period it taking place in the 1930s, The visuals, the buildings, the clothing are very old school. It takes place at like a medical or anatomy school of some sort. And there are also some unusual camera angles and close-up shots. So all these visual elements kind of make the film memorable, especially for a mainland Chinese horror film. Now we are introduced early on to a short-haired girl who seems to be an amateur fortune teller and detective, even though she's attending the school. Very likable character. I really liked her a lot. She's also got 3 roommates, so these 4 girls are our main protagonists. Pacing is a little bit on the slow side, but this is an engaging and fun murder mystery horror film. It reminded me slightly of the old school Italian giallo films. Not a lot, but a little bit. Maybe because of the murder mystery element and the fact that it's kind of a slasher as well, kind of mixed in. There's a moment involving the death of a character that locked me in for the rest of the runtime. After that particular scene, I was like, all right, someone's got to go down for this. So I was like, the film kind of grabs you at a certain point, and you really want to see the bad guy get taken down, the murderer get taken down. So it's engaging, you know what I mean? The mystery's wrapped up and explained fairly nicely by the end of the film. This isn't a film that leaves a lot of loose ends and ambiguity to it. It ties things up pretty neatly. Performances are good. I like them. And this one was man, I just watched this one on a whim, and I like this one quite a bit. Inside the Girls is a cool little movie that most people would not expect to come from mainland China. And I liked it. I definitely liked it. Now, availability is that it's on YouTube with subtitles, at least last time I checked, last week. And it's worth watching. It's definitely worth watching. Now we've moved to the Philippines. We're starting to country hop again. You know how we like to country hop. And this is another film that's kind of, it flies under the radar. And that is Dementia, 2014, Filipino horror. In the hopes of helping her Aunt Mara better deal with her dementia, Rachel moves her out of her family's remote ancestral home. There, Rachel records Mara's daily activities and helps engage the older woman in exercises and mental gymnastics, I guess you could call it, that would help her cognitive thinking, such as putting together jigsaw puzzles, stuff like that. What Rachel did not plan on is that Mara's presence in the house will stir up memories and presences that are better left undisturbed. They begin to see a ghost of the past come alive. So because of the protagonist's dementia, the family members think that her reactions to possible ghostly phenomena are due to her condition and new environment. One online reviewer, I forgot who it was, made a good point in observing that the conflict is not driven by human immorality, like a lot of ghost films do, or any horror film really, but instead by human frailty. And I found it to be a pretty interesting observation, and that's quite true for dementia. And there actually is a good dramatic core to this film that's most evident near the end. This definitely has a lot of atmosphere to it as well. You know, the old location is a bit different from a typical mansion. It's massive. This place is massive. And there's quite a bit of stone architecture and long hallways. Score is effectively moody. The music's good. There's also good use of sound. It does like that ringing ears trick when the protagonist gets scared and kind of blocks out what other people are saying to her. It's an oft-used tactic nowadays, but it works here. There are some fantastic shots of seaside environments, rocky terrains and cliffs by the sea. There's rocks all over the place in this. Definitely a very impactful visual aspect. And it sounds oddly familiar to another Filipino horror film I recently covered on this channel, Aurora from 2018, which also took place on or near a seaside shore. I think both of these films definitely benefit from their location and setting. Now, one of the recurring horror images in this film is a woman dressed in white with a white veil and mask over her face. I liked it. I like that style of ghost. It's a little bit, I don't know about different, but it's definitely not the Japanese onryo. And it's visually appealing, visually striking, I would say. On the negative side, there is some phone dialogue between the teenage girl and her friend. It's a bit cringy. And there are certain genre tropes that the film uses that I won't spoil. But, this film isn't perfect. But it is a legitimately good film. It was nominated for a bunch of awards, I think, in its home country, and actually won a decent number of them. So, like I said, there's a good chance you may not have heard of this film before, and there's a reason for that. It's difficult to find. It was previously posted on YouTube, kind of like Inside the Girls, but this one was subsequently taken down. So there are some other uploads currently on YouTube, I think without subs, but they're incomplete cuts of the film, so I don't think you can really watch this right now, unless you find it on another website. But if Dementia becomes available again, either on YouTube or somewhere else, it's worth checking out. If you want to keep up with Filipino horror. You could probably watch it without subtitles, because there is some English spoken in the film between the characters, and much of the story is told visually. So this is another one that keep on your radar. This is a good flick. Alright, our final film of the night, I think, is pretty underrated and underappreciated, in my opinion. Again, it's a film in a long-running franchise. This one of the most popular Japanese horror franchises, right? And that is Ju-on 3, The Beginning of the End. Of course, it's from Japan. A school teacher, played by Nozomi Sasaki, visits the home of a boy who has been absent from school for a period of time, unaware of the horrific tragedy that occurred in his household many years ago. So our protagonist is new to this school, and while taking attendance, notices that a boy has been absent for a number of days. So when she goes to his home, we have an idea, of course, what happens next. If you're at all familiar with Ju-on, you have an idea that bad stuff is going down. The storytelling structure of this film is similar to prior installments of the Ju-on franchise because there are titled segments of character names in between each section of the film. So Ju-on 3, The Beginning of the End, maintains the same dark tone and brisk pacing of its predecessors, with a plethora of horror sequences just kind of stacked on top of one another. It wastes no time on wasted, filler material, boring filler material and stuff like that, which I've always appreciated about this franchise. It gets down to business, and it cuts the fat. It's just no nonsense horror sequences, right? And it's one of the reasons why these films have a very rewatchable factor for me. But is Ju-on 3 just like more of the same? Maybe it does the same exact scares over again. It's really nothing new, right? Is it just milking the franchise to death? Well, there are a few familiar moments in terms of scares, because we see, Kayako and Toshio return. But this film also throws in some curveballs and misdirects to subvert your expectations. Even when it uses a familiar scare tactic, it sets it up like a prior film and then executes it differently. So it throws some curveballs at you, which I liked. There are some very cool and unexpected moments in this film that makes this installment memorable and distinguishable from its predecessors. A few of the scares are somewhat bizarre, and some of the death scenes are very different from what we usually see in a Ju-on film. And some reviewers actually took issue with this and found this film to be a little bit too different at times than the prior films in the franchise. I'm not going to spoil any of the specific scenes for you, but I will say this. The final shot of the film feels like something out of an old school American anthology, or an old school anthology from the 80s, like Creepshow or something. It's that different. And as I said, some reviewers online took issue with this, but I found it to be a welcome splash of creativity for this franchise. I thought it was fun. And there's some scenes in this movie you're like, I can't believe this is in a Ju-on film. You know what I mean? So this film definitely sets itself apart from some of the other films in the franchise. And I do think that if you think about it, it does kind of make sense how some of these scares play out. Now, the score and sound design are very good, as usual in this franchise. At times, it uses grating noises to nice effect. There are a few good practical special effects in this. If they were practical, they seem to be practical, including that final shot. And I like them. I did like them. One thing I'm a little bit uncertain of is that the script introduces spiral drawings into the mix, which I'm not familiar with in the rest of the franchise. I may have missed that in prior installment, but from my knowledge, it's kind of a new little nuance to this. I'm not sure if it was entirely supported by a revised story of Kayako or something like that, but I kind of felt like that was a little odd. You know what I mean? Like, why are these characters drawing spirals now? But it's a minor potential flaw that didn't really bother me much. Nozomi Sasaki, I think, is a nice lead actress. Reina Trendle also has a supporting role. You'll recognize her from the Shion Sono film Tag. This was directed by Masayuki Ochiai, who previously gave us Infection and The Hypnotist and some other stuff. I think Ju-on 3, The Beginning of the End, is probably his most purely entertaining film from the 2010s. You know, from like the last 10 or so years. So, you know, it's a very nice addition to this franchise, I think. In my opinion, I see myself rewatching Ju-on 3 quite a bit in the future. I've already watched it 3 times in the past handful of years, so I like this one. There's something about the Ju-on franchise that I think works better than the Ring franchise in terms of overall. You know what I'm saying? I think Ju-on has had better recent installments. I mean, Beginning of the End is 10 times better than either of the Sadako films. I'll tell you that right now. So, yeah, I like this one. I like it. And it is available on YouTube with subtitles. Also, there's a Region 3 DVD with subtitles floating around out there. So if you like Ju-on, check this one out. I think it's good. It actually almost made part 5 of this playlist. That's how much I enjoy it as like a pure entertainment piece. But it's the end of part 4. So that concludes part 4 of our journey through Asian horror films released in 2014. Of the 7 films I covered tonight, 4 of them involve psychotic humans as the main antagonist. So if you like films about psychos, you got some titles to get through tonight. And each of those films are quite different from one another as well. Even the supernatural horror films I reviewed tonight are quite distinguishable from one another. Only one of them, Ju-on 3, actually uses the traditional Japanese onryo. So we have a nice variety here. So be sure to check out part 5 of this playlist when it comes out, because we're going to cover my personal favorite Asian horror films from 2014. And we got a few doozies. As always, I'll see you next time.